Central Time. So make sure you do your part and share this content and this story and this video, whatever you need to do, you need to share it. Um, because again, we have been doing this for a year and a half. And if you haven't been inspired or you haven't grown over this year and a half, you must not be watching these videos. So you better go back and start over and watch them again, because we have some guests on here every single week. And we take a lot of time and effort in preparing the guests and finding the guests, because we want to make sure that the Black community are seeing real life stories, right? People that we see all the time on TV and BT and TED Talk and all these places. We never get to know their story. We never get to know what are they doing in their life or what were they doing before they got here. So it's important that you share these stories. You may not think that the story applies to you. You may not feel like the story impacted you or inspired you, but you never know who's in your circle that needs to hear the stories of the guests that we have on here. So please make sure you're doing your job by supporting the Black podcast and our community by sharing these videos. So that's your first job right now, is to share this video. Um, and your next job is to participate. So if you have any questions, or anything for our guests, please make sure that you're engaged with us. We don't want this to be a one-way conversation. We want you to engage. We want to know what you need. What do you feel that you need? And you never know how the guest may help or have resources or ideas that will help your situation or even your child's situation or your neighbor's child or whoever. So please make sure that you are engaging and just be involved. We really enjoy having you guys on and finding these guests every single week. And my partner over here, he got a cold or a cough or something. So he gonna give you his little spiel. But we want to thank you for supporting us over this last year and a half, or I don't know, year and some change towards a year and a half, because we really, really, truly appreciate the amount of support that we have had in the audience.
Yep. I like letting her go first, so I can just say what she said.
Whatever she said.
Um, so, guys, it's a brand new year, first episode of the year. Um, I'm excited to go through another year of these episodes because Sherelle and I, we have a laugh about the fact that we're kind of at each other all week long, trying to either get things done, manage each other's schedule, and then we get on this session here, and it's peaches and cream. So we go through it. We go
He
through it
really
with
doesn't like me.
we go through it all throughout the week to make happen what we want to happen for those who we're serving. Um, and that's one of the things. At the end of the day, they, and I'll just say they, don't want us to be able to make these things happen. They want us to be at each other's necks. They want us to give up. They want us to throw in the towel. We're having a conversation yesterday on Clubhouse, and we were speaking about a lot of the inequities, a lot of the disparities when it comes to the Black community and a lot of the schools that we deal with, and how certain funds and bills and things along those lines, they're designed not to go into our communities. And they don't like it when we figure out our own programs, when we figure out our own way of providing for our next generation. So that's why we have to make it work with one another, because the next generation is dependent upon us. Now I could sit here and talk about myself all day. One thing that I'm big about is just go and read about me yourself. You can learn about me, then ask questions from there. I've been blessed over the last couple of years to be able to land a decent number of media interviews, have a handful of publications. So you can read those to learn a little bit more about my work. But at the end of the day, I'm all about preparing that next generation, be it in mental health, be it financially. At the end of the day, if you don't have your mind right, it's going to be hard to figure out how to get your money right. And if you don't have your money right, life becomes so much more difficult. So those are two of the areas that I focus on. And thankfully, I have a PhD, no, not a PhD, a ED, and here a doctor that is alongside me, bringing her brilliance, her diligence, and her resilience to add to what it is that I bring to the table. And the two of us, I would like to say that we are quite the force when it comes to pouring into that next generation. But we are only as strong as those who are willing to connect with us. So the gentleman that we're about to bring to the stage, I'm excited about hearing his story. Anytime I see another brother that's out doing great things for the community, that's being an example, I'm all about it because there's not enough of us that are having the spotlight shown on us. I'm not going to say there's not enough of us doing it. There's not enough of us that people know are doing it. So I'm glad to be able to help put this gentleman in front of the masses so that we know, we see the good news instead of all the negativity. And off of that note, without further ado, Dr. Uwe Osunde, how's it going?
Good evening. You got it right too.
Yes, sir. I had a micro glitch. Let me make sure I get it right. But yes,
Just say it
sir.
real quick.
Real quick. Good evening. And listen, you just probably added another layer of pressure. I didn't realize on the first episode of 2022. I followed your work and I've seen some of the people you've had on the podcast, and you got some real headliners, people doing some amazing and transformative work. So it's an honor to be able to join both of you, and I really am impressed with the work that you're doing, but really more so the mission behind why you're doing what you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And it was such a blessing when I reached out to you and you accepted, and I was like, yes, he's awesome. So I do appreciate you accepting our invite and being a guest, and we just look forward to learning more about you. We always like to start off, we say that behind every story or every glory is a story. And so we want to know more about before we get to what you're doing now and all the things that you've accomplished. Where are you from, and what are the dynamics of your family like? Where did it all start?
Yeah, no, thank you again for the opportunity. This might go into like a whole 10-minute story here, so I want to do the question some justice. So my heritage is Nigerian. Okay, you can probably tell by seeing the name, and ironically enough, even though can characterize it and say you're Americanized, I was born in Nigeria. And my father was an educator who got his doctoral degree from The Ohio State University. And when he was going through his doctoral programs, we moved to Columbus, Ohio. Spent some time there. When he completed his degree, we moved back to Nigeria for a handful of years. I have three brothers who are all doing amazing things in different parts of the country right now. And for those of you who might know things about Nigerian families, there are some very high standards that are placed on Nigerian students in terms of expected, anticipated accomplishments. I will say that although it was not explicitly placed on us, it was probably something that was just understood that would ultimately happen. So we went back to Nigeria for a handful of years, and my father taught there at the university, and ultimately got a tenure track position here in the States. And we ended up moving back to, we moved to Pennsylvania, a small town in the middle outside of the Poconos, but probably about an hour from Penn State, maybe an hour and a half, a small town called Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. He became a professor there, was teaching education, and just growing up and seeing how many hours my dad put in. And as an athlete, as a high school athlete, particularly an accomplished high school athlete, I probably saw my father at maybe 5 of my games over time. So in my head, I always said when I became a dad, I would not want to be an educator because I would want to be able to go to my kids' games. At every game, all my friends, all their parents were there cheering them on, so on and so forth. And for me, being a star athlete, one of the biggest stars on the team, my father wasn't there. My mother was there, but that was largely the process. And it's ironic how I got into sports. I have younger brothers who are just absolute studs when it comes to we call it midget football in Pennsylvania, right? We didn't call it Pop Warner, but they were just absolutely phenomenal what they did. And me, I was a basketball player. I didn't play football until I got into high school. I had asthma. My father said, "You can't play football because I ain't trying to take you to the hospital every time you start wheezing." But finally, at some point, my sophomore, my junior year, enough of my close friends started to get on me and call me out and say, "If you were half the athletes your little brothers are, you might make a decent football player." I came out. My father let me, and I didn't know anything about the game of football. I was jumping off sides, false starts, everything in between. You put me on the basketball court, though, I'm dunking on people. I'm dunking on people. But ultimately, my athletic ability separated me. And my senior year, I started to pick up some accolades. And we had a coach who was recruiting me at a Division II school in Pennsylvania, and got hired in the Division I program at the University of Connecticut at UConn. Showed my film to the head coach at that point in time, and he came down and actually came down to a basketball practice. My point guard threw the basketball off the backboard a few times. I did some pretty theatrical dunks. Next thing you know, I was offered a 4-year scholarship, and it really kind of took off from there.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm glad you brought up athletics and what athletics did for you, right? Because I'm also an athlete, and I know what opportunities that it helped me with, right? Even though my father was in the military, I always had a stable home. I would have got to college regardless, with or without the scholarship. But the fact that I was able to get a scholarship, it starts to form some kind of independence, right? That you can operate in your gift, and yeah, you could pay for it, but I got a scholarship,
Right.
and so, but through that journey of just being an athlete in high school and then going on to college, there was stuff that I saw, right? There was things that I noticed even at the high school level that I knew wasn't quite right. I was like, okay, why is the boys being treated different when it comes to athletics and academics than we are, right? We were still expected to go to class, do your work, and be an athlete. They were expected to be an athlete, right? And so I started to see the type of the different challenges or channels that people would change and do just to get these kids like eligible, or whether it's put them in special ed classes to pass them on through. And so I remember seeing that in high school and being like, that ain't gonna work. And then when I got to college, those same athletes that were my friends that were supposed to sign at D1 school, they get there and they don't have their credits, or they were, they short this and they short that. And I was just like, oh my God. So then being the athlete, seeing it, and then getting into education and seeing it, it was like, okay, so we've been doing this for a very long time, right? Like this has been something that's just become the, hey, if you put them in special ed, then they can't fail. And then, they'll be eligible, but not informing the parents on, this is something that can follow these kids for the rest of their life. Do they really need help? Do they, do they really have these struggles? So I'm glad that you shared your experience in athletics. Being that you had already had a background or your culture of just being very strict. I always say that like Nigerian families, Asian families, from just being an educator, you just see certain traditions of where C's and B's weren't acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the Black community, it's like, oh, you passing? Oh, okay, you got a 70? Good job, But in other families, I would have students, even when I became a coach, I would have Nigerian students, or I would have Asian students, and they would be like, Coach, I got to go talk to my teacher. I got a 92. And I'm thinking, okay, it's supposed to be a 95. But for them, it was a big deal. Yeah. So can you talk about just still having those same expectations academically, like from your family, but also that competitive side? What was that experience like with your peers, right? When you're seeing other people not caring about their grades and just kind of getting passed along. What was that thought process for you?
Yeah, you know what? I think I struggled with that growing up, and when I say I struggle with that growing up, because you bring up some very, very poignant points about kids being placed in less rigorous courses, right? So they can pass and all those different things. What was actually even probably more heartbreaking about it is when the child initiated it, right? And say, I want to go in this class because I know I'm gonna get this grade in this class, right? And it really kind of talks about the institutionalization of that kind of path that it just becomes a factory, right? The irony in this, Dr. Hobson, is when I think about my youth and my interaction with academics, I actually contrast it to my siblings, right? And when I say that I contrast it to my siblings, I got some brilliant siblings. When I say brilliant, I mean brilliant. My older brother right now is an anesthesiologist, right? I got another brother right after me who 2 degrees. He's a coach at Westchester University outside Philadelphia and is an entrepreneur. I got a younger brother who graduated high school at 16, like 9 or 10 in his class with, 4 point something GPA, took Russian, in college. Don't ask me why he took Russian, right? So for me, by all means, I was not a bad student by any means. I was somewhere between like an 83% and like an 87. I was like, that B plus, solid B student. And
In the football world, that's an A student because most of the football guys got D's.
we're trying to change that narrative, though. We're trying to change that narrative, right? So, so that was my role. And when I got to school, I wasn't a great test taker in terms of the SAT and all those different things. And I was worried about that stigma, how I was going to be perceived. And in a little context, though, I also was, from an emotional standpoint, I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian community. So it's like now you're worried about all eyes being on you in terms of people making some kind of judgment that you fit in the stereotype. You're not as smart, you're just here for the sports and X, Y, and Z. And, so with my GPA strong and solid enough to get into college, and I went through my first semester at UConn at the University of Connecticut. And it was like a slap in the face what my GPA came back at, right? And it was tough to have that conversation, at home, right? But ultimately rebounded. But if I'm being even more honest and open, I would say that I did not learn truly what it meant to be a student until graduate school, where you're forced to learn how to be a student, right? As an athlete, you have a structured schedule. You take the courses that you want to take. I felt like I had an outstanding major. I was a psych undergrad major. I had some amazing professors, and certainly after my sophomore year and into my junior and senior year, my GPA was in a good place. But really, what it meant to be a student is something I would say I did not learn until I got into graduate school, and it was hard. It was initially hard, right? I struggled with that internally, and all the self-discipline that you thought you had when you were an athlete has to be redirected in a different way, right? It has to be redirected in a different way. So, when I got into this field of education and, given some of the context that you just created about, kids being channeled into special education, and do you really need the support, or, what's the best way to, support you in ways where you can build that kind of educational muscle and that internal resiliency, it became a lot of the conversations I was having with my students. Now, the good thing about it is that when I got into professional education, I came in as a school counselor. Right, my first master's degree was in school counseling. Wow. So I was able to pair a lot of the counseling skills with really trying to find a way to build kids' self-perceptions as academics. Academics, right? Yeah. To your point, we're gonna have a whole bunch of kids who are just 5-star athletes, from Pennsylvania, Texas, New York, Florida, whatever, right?
You don't know what they are.
Exactly, right? But at some point in time, athletics will stop. Either because, your time runs out, you age out, or you get hurt. And you still have to be able to have some skills that brings value into the rest of the world.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that you had spoke about how, you wasn't the best test taker, right? And I always share this story with even my athletes or coaches, whoever. I told them I was the student that in high school or middle school, when they said, okay, we're going to do a round robin, I think they call it now, where everybody's going to read a part of the chapter and I would be like, I gotta go to the bathroom. I'll go to the bathroom, stay there until they skip me 3-4 times because I knew that I read slower and I didn't know I'm like, why I can't? Can I not read or something? Or I would have a hard time pronouncing certain words, and so I was like, okay, well, I can't say that word, or I can't. And so what I would do is I would kind of measure when it was going to be my turn. Now, if it was a paragraph that I knew I could read quick, then I would stay. But I would look and be like, okay, so he about to read that one, which means my chapter should be about. Oh no, I can't read that one. I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and so I would do that. And the crazy thing, I'm sorry, the crazy thing is I got away with that my whole life, right? So when I got to college, and I remember being in my first biology class or something, and they were like, okay, well, we're not going to go over this stuff because this is all stuff y'all should have learned last year in high school. And I'm thinking, I don't remember any of that stuff. Like,
Mhm.
so I can't tell you like,
Slide.
stories of my high school experience. Like I remember running track, going to class, passing, graduating, going to get my bachelor's or going to college and graduating my bachelor's and then, graduated and that was it. And then going to get my master's grade. Like I don't think that I really had to learn and confront my learning demons until I got older. And I was like, I'm really struggling. But by then I had already mastered how to get through it. So I knew, okay, the type of person you are, you need to, while everybody's going to go do something, you need about a week of studying. So that's highlighting, a pink highlighter, a yellow highlighter, an orange highlighter for this and that, and sticky notes. And that's just how I learned. And I still do that to this day. And so I share that with my athletes, right? When they see me, they're like, oh, well, Doc, you don't understand. You smart. I'm like, girl, you know how long it take me to read something? Like I have to read things over and over and over and over and over and take a note just to remember what I read. Um, and so I think that we have to share those stories more because people put that type of um, pressure on you that if you're not using certain words or you don't have I didn't have a 4.0 GPA in high school or college or whatever, but I knew I was going to pass. And so
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned those challenges that you had and still were able to accomplish the things that you did. You also mentioned something else about um, being an athlete in high school or college, the type of skills and characteristics that we gain from it, right? We learn how to be competitive. We learn how to be resilient. We know how to, you work for, what you reap, you sow. You put in work, this is what you get. These are the results. And I
Mhm.
carried a lot of those same skills into my professional life, which has worked for me, but then it also sometimes worked against me because I remember when my brother passed away, I started talking to a grieving counselor, and she said, when you think about life, what do you think about? I said, winning, winning. And she said, what are you winning exactly? I'm not sure. To speaking to somebody who was an athlete, she's like, I'm not sure what gold medal you're trying to get, or and I couldn't tell her what that looked like to me. I just knew that it was winning, what I felt is winning. So whether it was reaching certain goals or whatever. And so if you can talk about both of those situations, like that learning curve for you, and you were blessed to be in a school counselor. So that is unique because you got to see it, like you said, from a the self-identity piece or the trauma, especially now that our kids suffer with. So now you can create programs that actually support that, right? Because you're in that space. So counselors or people can't say, well, he don't understand, because you do, because you have that background. And I want you to also speak about just the skills and the type of things that you did gain from athletics that has now transpired into your life that you do, things that you're doing now.
Yeah, no, that's very, very well said. And there is that transition that's typically a challenge for most people to go through after, particularly after athletics stops. And for me, I was fortunate enough to have a very productive career, certainly at the collegiate level, and then I call it my cup of tea. Having spent some time with some NFL teams, I started with the Cleveland Browns, and then I spent a year in Buffalo with the Bills on the practice squad. And I'm convinced that if you have any kind of time or experience at a high profile team, okay, if you have any kind of time or experience and you're observant and reflective enough. I think there's a lot of transferable skills that you can take that you can now move into, the general sphere of whatever you choose to do, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's entrepreneurship, so on and so forth. And the reason why I'm saying that is, if you can experience some level of leadership in a high profile team, you can probably lead an organization because you see it every day, right? And the same way you look at a football team, the head coach is comparable to a CEO, right? The offensive coordinator could be a senior VP for marketing. The other defensive coordinator could be a senior VP for research and development, whatever it is. You can kind of take a look at organizational structure. But within that, you're able to figure out how you want to be able to do market analysis, right? And market analysis is comparable to your schedule. Who's in your conference? What meets do you have coming up, right? And the market analysis can be, it's a scouting report, if you really want to think about it, right? And then ultimately, when you come up with your scouting report, you come up with strategy. What do they do best? And how are we going to design X, Y, and Z to make sure we're positioned to win the game, right? It's not any different than what happens in free enterprise, right? You come in as an entrepreneur, what's your product, what's your service? You do a market analysis, you have a good sense of your competitor, certainly in your region. And if you want to go global, you go global. And then you bring some brilliant minds to construct strategy. So when you hear about coaches going into a war room or watching film and breaking all those things down, it's strategy, whether it's intended to isolate their star player or whether it's, you want to do some things with your offensive line, if you want to do some things with your bigs, or if you want your guards to hold the ball for 80% of the game. But you also have goals and metrics, right? So when in my work right now, right, as a superintendent of schools, I'm not, you certainly don't run it like you run a football organization. It's dramatically different, but there are applicable principles, right? So number one, leadership anchored in that is some level of ability to remain calm under pressure, right? In the work that we do in athletics, it's consensus building, right? And trying to move the entire team towards a goal. In education, it's identical. And the goal is always, what does it look like for children, right? We're doing this work for people's children. That has to be at the center. So to Ryan's point earlier, he was talking about, the conversation in Clubhouse last night. And for us, when we start to look at what happens in schools, beyond the different metrics that we try to hit in order to make sure we have quality schools and our kids have outstanding experiences, we look at different indicators that may potentially speak to marginalization. So, for example, achievement gaps, right? But even more so than achievement gaps, we also look at opportunity gaps, right? Opportunity gaps or access gaps. So to your point, Dr. Hobson, you made that reference about kids being tracked into special ed. Well, did they have the opportunity or did they have access to AP is a bigger question. Layered on that is, well, do people believe they should have access to AP? And do people believe that once they have access, they will thrive? If that doesn't exist, then that child is going to remain in that perpetual cycle of, let me just go down this track because it's easier, right? And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That child does not know how to set new standards for themselves. And that process, debatably, can follow them through life. So a lot of carryover, a lot of transferable skills and experiences when you think about your experience in the athletic space and now to the professional space.
Absolutely.
That's I mean, you're speaking so much of what I speak on. I help lead a quarterly training last weekend of every quarter. Group of entrepreneurs taking business concepts, helping them become profitable, get to 25, 50, six figures, beyond, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And we go through the business plan, just as you were mentioning, the market analysis. You do a market analysis in so many different areas in life. You just have to break it down. Look, you're checking out what your competition, what they got going on, and how you can set yourself apart. But a lot of times in doing a market analysis, those who are coming from marginalized communities, they don't have the data. i.e., I don't know where to look. All I see around me, the market that I see around me, looks just like me, struggling just
Mhm.
like me. So it's up for those of us who have been able to get out, to go see and realize that, you know what, there's more beyond, the boundaries of this community. Is up to us to show, like, look, you can go here, change your life, and you don't have to stay gone. That's one of the things. Excuse me. That's one of the things that you hear in higher education, especially in a lot of fields where, well, I'll speak personally to this. Coming from the South, similar to yourself, I grew up. I went to high school in a predominantly white community, so I was one of the few black males that really excelled. Graduated 3.89 GPA, four sport athlete, all the advanced classes, number 11 in my class. Like, I was the guy that nobody wanted to stay because they knew I would get caught up in the street life, in some type of no good. They wanted me to go so that I could grow, but they didn't want me to go too far because they wanted me to be able to pour back into the community.
Absolutely.
I didn't see that until I moved away. I was living in Miami, Florida. I had no desires to move back to South Mississippi, but I started to see in a lot of the kids that were aging out of the child welfare system, that were becoming adults and had no idea of how to become an adult. I started to see in them what I saw in a lot of my peers before I
Mhm.
left home. So I told myself, you know what? I can work on my master's degree down here in Miami and pour into this community, or I can go back home and pour back into my community. So I came back, and I mean, coincidentally enough, we're having this conversation. I just landed a contract with a local bank that wants me to partner with them to go into my high school in March to give the very first financial education
Yes,
workshop.
sir.
That's going to
Yes,
be a
sir.
series.
Congratulations. That's a big deal.
Yes, sir. And it's ultimately, we all, when we're speaking on the entrepreneurship space, there's so many people that get into entrepreneurship for the sexy of it. I want to be my own boss. I want to have the lifestyle. If that's why you're getting into entrepreneurship, you're probably going to fall on your face because you have the wrong reasons. You need to see a problem and have a desire, have a skill set, some type of natural talent to fill that void, to become part of the solution. And that's why I got into entrepreneurship. And nothing fuels me more than when I have a child that tells me my life changed because of what you told me. My opportunities changed because of what you showed me. Like, being that example, pouring in, supporting, and not allowing their societal expectations from their surrounding community to define where they're going to go. Because had I done that, I'd probably be working blue collar labor. Not saying that anything is wrong with it, but I'd probably be at one of these industrial sites down here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, making
Mhm.
about 60, 70,000 a year, living in a mobile home, driving a vehicle that looks nicer than, or that costs more than what my home costs. I'd be one of those stereotypes.
Mhm.
They call them down here TBB, typical black boy.
Typical
So
black. Mm.
I would have become one of those had I not left Mississippi and saw what the world had to offer. Spent time living in Costa Rica, learned a second language. So I was able to experience these other cultures. And now I come back and immerse myself back into my community, but giving them a different version of myself so that they can start to see a different version of themselves within themselves. And, I just hear so much of that in you, whereas you make reference to the work that you did as an athlete, but then transferring that leadership skill into what it is that you do now. And so many people have no idea how transferable leadership skills are, how transferable leadership self-discipline is. And like you and Dr. Hobson mentioned, it looks different, but when you can really channel it, like, I was killing it out there on the track. I was killing it on the court. I know I can do this, but how do I really channel that same swag, that same energy, that same confidence, and put it into this vein? So I applaud you for the leadership that you exemplify because they need us so much, that next generation.
That's very well said. I think you hit a critical point that I think needs to continue to get illuminated, in that representation matters, right? So children mimic what we do, and I would take it even a step further and not even say just children. Our peers mimic what we do, right? So for them to see us do it and hear it in our words, right? Oftentimes when I was a principal, I said this on a regular basis to the kids. After a while, kids will tune you out. They do it to principals. It doesn't matter how much they love you, right? But if they hear it from their friends, it has a different intonation, right? And so to your point about, people seeing it and kids seeing it, it's even more critical. I remember, for example, the first year I was a principal, a lot of my friends, people of color, they're like, bro, you're going to be so good with the kids, man. I want to be a principal too. Y'all thought I just woke up and I was a principal? Like it just happened like that? You figure out all the state certifications or all the degrees I had to go through. So to your point though, Ryan and Cheryl, most people, so when you're on the track and you're trying to trim your time down, right? Nobody's seeing you staying late after practice or waking up in the morning before the sun comes up and putting the blocks down and, X, Y, and Z. Nobody's seeing like Kobe's in the gym before a game, 5 hours, throwing up 1,000 shots. Nobody's seeing that part. They just see the 35 he drops, whoever he plays, right? Nobody's seeing all the research or all the books, how you're really kind of trying to learn and master different subject matter areas, or how you're trying to figure out how to build capacity around an organization. All those different things that goes into, all that shows up as the title that says principal or entrepreneur or CEO or X, Y, and Z, and everybody says, I want to do it. You're 100% right. You can do it too, right? Because I wasn't the best test taker. Brian, like you, I had no 3.8 GPA. My GPA wasn't bad, but it wasn't no 3.8, right? But at the same time, I worked at it. So if you're serious about this, if this is something you want to do, I just ask that you have the resiliency to stick it through when things become challenging, and we'll take care of the rest. We got you. The one thing that I really, really appreciate as I get older, in my network, I have a lot of accomplished people of color who are just doing some amazing things. And at this stage in our lives, and I still consider myself pretty young, the predominant theme in our conversation is giving back, right? And you see it happen. It's almost kind of intuitive to Greek organizations, right? Black Greek organizations, right? It's how do we give back? And uniquely enough, I believe, and I've been at the front lines of education for so long, our kids are ready for that. This group of children, this generation of children, grew up in the social justice era and the technology era. Mm-hmm. They're poised, right? And one of the things that's a governing philosophy of mine is that I'm not going to tell our kids what to think as much as we're trying to procure and teach them how to think critically, right? And one of the things that drives my work, I remember when in the early phases of my graduate program, it was kind of good. My father passed away my senior year in high school, so it was a challenging time. And I was kind of going through my father's stuff, and I have a bunch of his old binders. This is early 90s and everything, and late 80s binders, still in the 3-ring binders. Google Drive didn't exist at that point in time. PDFs probably didn't exist and all that stuff, right? And I was going through his stuff, and the university he worked at in Nigeria is called the University of Benin or Uniben. And the emblem of the seal, the university seal, was the Festac mask, right? So if you've ever seen, everybody's seen Black Panther, right? So the scene where Michael B. Jordan is he's in the museum and that mask that they still out. You remember that scene? That's actually the seal that's my culture right there, right? So I was looking at the seal of the university, and at the bottom of it, you look at all these institutions here in the States, and there's usually some kind of Latin inscription. At the bottom of that, it said, knowledge for service, right? So, it was something that really kind of stuck to me at a deep emotional, maybe it's because I was also, at the same time going through that piece, with my father, lost my father and everything. But it was an inscription that really kind of stuck with me in terms of a philosophical approach that can guide my work as I'm doing it now at a systemic level with children and staff is how do we grow? How do we get so deep in our subject matter in a way where we can turn it around, turnkey it around, and deliver service for children, for families, for staff, right? And I haven't yet figured out. I'm an early career superintendent, right? And it's a very unique time to become a superintendent in the middle of a pandemic. But at some time in the future, I'm going to figure out how to really kind of turn this into something that uh, anchors and drives my work.
Well, you already have all the tools that you need, and we believe and know and confident that you are more than equipped and ready for whatever challenge. So that's why you right there, right where you're supposed to be. So we thank you for that. Um, my study was African American males and the effects of athletics on their educational plans. And when I got into that space, we talk about being better leaders and having conversations with the students, and I found that I was always like motivating them, telling them like, I don't lead by example, I am the example. So when you see me, this is what you're going to see. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would just constantly have these conversations with the girls, and like you said, after a while they're like, oh God, coach is coming, she gonna start preaching again. It's like, look, this is my job.
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell you what I need to tell you. But then I start realizing as I started getting into uh started to realize like I love being a coach, but then it was like I wanted to be somebody's boss. I wanted to be a leader, because I realized that the problem wasn't the kids. It was the people leading the kids. I was like, these coaches are out of control. Like, so who are they looking up to? So when I started to very young, I was a head coach, and I had my dad always says it was a blessing in the beginning because I dealt with a lot of challenges being a very young head coach. I'm 40 now, but when I was 23 years old, I looked like I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
so the challenge of, well, she's not going to be able to handle those kids. She looked like one of those kids. She probably act like one of those kids. And so I already came into something knowing it's going to be different because I'm in the fire. I know what these kids need. So it was certain things I started to implement into my program before I even thought about being anything else. I was like, well, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to act. This is how we're going to speak. This is what, when we went on track trips, I would always take them to a steakhouse for dinner. So you know how to order a steak. This is how, get everybody put your phone in this bag, and so just start teaching them, conversations and being a woman and being an athlete, right? So I would tell them, just because you play basketball or run track doesn't mean that it's okay for your nails to be not painted and your toes to be looking like Frito pies. Like, you need to do better. You comb your hair, and so I used to have those conversations. And as a young head coach, I remember my assistant coaches who were white, they would say, they started writing anonymous letters to like UIL and just saying, she spends more time mentoring than she does coaching. And so I remember having this battle of, these things are necessary to teach them. These are the skills and I knew no other way, right? And so it was just so funny how everything started transpiring when finally my principal at the time, I love him to pieces. He was Caucasian, but he was a realist, and he was one of those people that if he hired you because you know your job.
Mm-hmm.
So after the emails kept coming in and coming in, he finally said, "Okay, we got to have a meeting because she keeps just emailing, and I have to address it because for his job, he had to
Right.
address the issues." And so
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting there and facing everybody, and it was a whole line of people there and people complaining and the principal listening, the superintendent, everybody was sitting there. And it all worked in my favor. But I just remember them saying, she's always mentoring. She's always talking about choices. She spends half of track practice in study hall going over whatever, putting certain words on the board, self-love, respect, all these different things. And I remember at the very end, my principal and my superintendent said, well, whatever she's doing is working. Because even though I spent a lot of time mentoring, in her opinion, they don't realize I was building a relationship, which in turn built a program, successful programs. I got so bored with winning because I was winning back to back to back to back to back to back, championship after championship in the championship. And what people didn't realize, it was about the relationships, right? And what I didn't know as I was getting into now out of coaching and started getting into the leadership role, I said, it's the coaches that need help, right? It's the kids are going to follow, like you mentioned, the kids follow you. You set the expectation. So if you're thinking that they won't understand or can't take AP classes, if your coach is not involved in what courses and classes that you're taking, in conversations that you're having, in organizations that you're a part of, then how can you expect anything else from the athletes, right? And so I want you to talk about just being a principal at that space, and having these conversations now with coaches, right? Because you're not the average principal at this point where they can say, well, he don't know. Like, well, this man went to the whole NFL. So that conversation is not even, we're not even going to have that conversation when they start saying, well, these kids can't do this, or these kids aren't capable, or these kids, because now they have to have a different conversation with someone who has a counseling background, a leadership background, who has been an athlete on a professional level, collegiate level, a high school level. If you talk about the type of programs or conversations or that you had to implement on those campuses or on your campuses to change that narrative of what athletics look like. Can you let us know like what that was like for you?
Yeah. So Connecticut is a small state. You got to drive, through Connecticut if you're going from New York to Boston, right? And so Connecticut is a small state, and now I'm a superintendent. But prior to that, I was a principal, and I was blessed and privileged enough to be principal of a high school called Windsor High School, which is you look at our demographic breakdown, it's predominantly students of color. It's a suburb of Hartford, which is, the capital city, and predominantly students of color. But at the same time, concurrently, Windsor High School probably has the best athletic department in the state. And I say that bar none. I have three, and if the fourth keeps going, I had three, and if the fourth keeps going, could debatably become a Hall of Fame coach. Kenny Smith is a basketball coach. Rob Fleeton, football coach, state champions. Calvin Kearse, outstanding coach, and Coach Joe Surface, a baseball coach. They just literally won everything. They won everything. When I say everything, they won everything. Basketball championships, Division I scholarships, football scholarships. One of my players right now was a starting safety for the Jets. We had two players come out of the same class who one signed with the Cowboys, ended up getting released. It was just a factory, right? When I say factory, it was just a factory. And I come in as a young 32, 33-year-old principal in the midst of all this Hall of Fame coaches. Don't get me wrong, my athletic career is celebrated. People knew who I was coming in. And I think that positioned me for a lot of respect. And walking into that space and analyzing the school, there was a lot of things that had to change or improve, And the one thing I was cautious about doing with my leadership is making sure not to overstep my lane. Does that make sense? Okay. I got well-accomplished coaches who are brilliant on what they do, but not overstepping my lane was also grounded on me being clear what's important to me. So I said to them, all of them, take care of the kids. That's number one. Okay. And however that looks like. But I also told them that our kids, our student athletes, would not fall into any stereotypes. So it's not going to be a path and a track to, easy classes and so on and so forth. I should also say that I had some of the most outstanding athletic directors, right? And and I also understand the impact that student athletes, as well as other kids who are in the performing arts, have on school culture, right? Um, so as long as they had a good understanding of what my expectations were, they were free to do everything and anything they need to do to develop a young man and a young woman. Okay, as long as they did not compromise any ethical or moral parameters, and they didn't put anybody in harm's way. Keep me in the know. But with the full student body, okay, in my role, a couple of my friends called me Joe Clark back in the day, right? In my role, I was not there to tell my students what to do. It was an open campus in a sense. And I listen, my kids heard my voice, and I just happened to see one of my graduates probably about 3 weeks ago. I was out to dinner, and she's in her last year in school, and she wants to be a nurse. She wants to travel the world and go down to Miami and all those different things. And we're talking. And she said, Mr. Osunde, we got so tired of hearing your voice at 7:35 in the morning and 2:15 in the afternoon. But I would literally get on the PA system, not to tell them what they should do, right? Because I wanted them to have that autonomy to recognize that this is your space. While you're in this space, you will take care of each other, and you're going to grow together. But I did tell them, what they should do. I did tell them what they can't do, right? I.e., y'all ain't going to be reckless around here. You guys represent a community. You guys represent each other, right? And you guys have to be able to fully embrace what that means, right? So it's not telling them what to do, but being clear about what you can't do, right? But to your point, when you have skilled coaches, right, and you kind of hear about this in the business world, right? I think Steve Jobs said this a while ago. You hire brilliant people and you get out their way. You hire brilliant people and you get out their way. So, if I was principal working with you, Dr. Hobson, number one, you guys must have some very impressive budgets. You over here taking kids to steakhouses. We did Chick-fil-A if we had the money. You over here.
You got to spread it out. You got to spread it out. I didn't say they were getting a ribeye. I just said they were getting steak.
But it's really about hiring smart people and then being clear about some of the parameters. And at the end of the day, safety, ethics, and morality is really what it is. Outside of that, you got some smart people, giving them resources they need to do the work effectively. Keep the kids at the center. Continue to promote the message about what the expectations are. And it's an organism that kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things I used to teach them, even about like finances or budget. I would get them when we get on the bus to go where we're going, we would get a good breakfast, and then I would let them know, well, lunchtime, we're going to probably have Subway and this and that, and then we're going to get ready for dinner. And so that's when we changed our outfits, and I would tell them, I'm not going to tell you what you need to bring, but I'm going to tell you what we will look like when we walk into the restaurant and how we're going to be talking. We're not going to be loud. We're not going to run talking across the table like we're at, a family reunion. And so we have to set those expectations. So I really appreciate you saying that, because even being in a leadership role right now, where I constantly get questioned on, would you be able to hire, or would you be able to fire a football coach, or would you be able to do this because you look so much like a woman and they're not sure if a man. But I said, look, expectations don't change. We have to be very consistent with what we're doing. And so you may coach a different way or speak a different way, but this is, as a whole, this is the goal. And like you said, to create athletes who are better people. Whether they pursue, there was a kid last week. I like to visit different classrooms and hear different, the kids do different things. And one of the boys had to go up and he had to do a speech on football. And And so he started doing his speech or whatever. And then at the end, I said, we get questions. So I raised my hand and I said, because his speech was on why you should be a football player or something like why football is important or something like that. And I said, you know what the percentage? I said, what is the percentage of men that go to the NFL? He said, about 50%. I said, no, it's not. But it was just, again, like, so what are we telling our kids? Are we telling them that they're going to do it? Are we making them better men? Are we making them better women, preparing them for life? Or we're so focused on, when you make it or if you make it. And that if is starting to get even smaller now, like you said about the pandemic, because people aren't the budgets and universities are not as large as they used to be. And so now they're not recruiting, they maybe at one time they were recruiting 200 kids a year. It might be cut to 100 kids a year, and you may not even get a full scholarship. Now they're splitting scholarships more. And so we have to start with like you said, with your leaders. When you're having those conversations, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I will tell you what the expectations are, and those expectations don't change. And I believe that so much in our Black community, we can get a lot of things going in the right direction if we would just be a little more consistent, right? You don't see the consistency enough. It's like you start off doing something, and Brian always talked about, we start off protesting and then we fall off, and then something else happened and we come back and shut it down again, and then we fall off. And so we do the same thing like in education or business or whatever we're doing. So when you learn to say, the kids knew, the parents knew, your coaches, your staff knew at 7:35 or 2:35 you coming back on the mic, or at 7:35 they're going to expect to hear your voice. And so people need to see consistency, and I believe that's what makes our programs and organizations so powerful and successful. If you can talk now about your transitioning from being a principal to, did you always have that desire of being an athletic? A superintendent? Did you know that was your route? Did you know you was going that direction? And then just talk about that journey for us of going from being a principal to a superintendent, because a lot of people who aren't in education don't understand what that means. I always make a joke and say, you tell somebody, oh, he's a superintendent, like, oh, okay. It's like they think of it like a manager at Randall's or something, like, oh, okay, he's like a manager of the school district. Like, no, that's not how it's not quite that. So if you can talk more about that journey that you have as being a principal and now going into being a superintendent.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, maybe you and Brian both remember when we started this conversation here, I had mentioned that early in my life, I never wanted to be an educator just because of my experience with my father, And it's funny that I think my mother said maybe 3 or 4 years ago that you're doing a lot. You have a lot of the same kind of similarities and traits. I think we're different, But when I was a school counselor, I came in and, obviously all the press in the pub about my athletic career. So, kids in Connecticut knew who I was. They come out to the UConn football camps and basketball camps and all that stuff. And, I landed my first school counseling position at a small town on the shoreline of Connecticut, but a massive football town. When I say massive, I mean massive, right? Probably not like Texas, right? And probably not like Pennsylvania, probably not like Mississippi, but for us here in Connecticut, it's one of the oldest rivalries in the country. At 150 years, they own that rivalry. A small town called New London, against some economic challenges, right? Very diverse, small town but urban, and achievement issues as well. So I came in and a seasoned school administrator, man of color, pulled me in and said, listen, it's like, sit down. So I want to talk to you. He said, I see the way you work with kids, all kids. I see the way you build relationships with your colleagues, and I see the way you work with families. So I want you to think about this. His name was Lou Allen. He said, I want you to think about this. He said, in the next 5 years, there's going to be a wave of retirements in Connecticut, and Connecticut's going to need some good school leaders. So I'm sitting there thinking, I just want to coach football right now. We got some stud athletes. At that point in time, we had Chris Dunn, who played point guard for the Bulls. Jordan Reed went out to DC with the Redskins. I just want to coach. I want to win games. I want to, get settled down. Because at that point in time, I just had my last training camp with the Dolphins. So it was just like I was just a young person trying to settle down. And he had that conversation with me, and I thought about it. I had a follow-up conversation, and it was pretty refreshing, inspiring that conversation came from a man of color, because now I had somebody in front of me who was doing it, right? And did my research, enrolled in a program down here in New Haven, Connecticut, Southern Connecticut State. Got my cert, jumped into it. While I was going through that program, my mind works in very systemic ways. That's just the way my mind works, in very systemic ways. It's trying to figure out how this department intersects with this department. And I think it's also because I spent so much time at the university level, the University of Connecticut, just knowing how the president's office works with the athletic department and student life and all those different things. It became systems, right? And when I started studying, I started learning deeper and deeper, not just about how curriculum works, not just how about pupil services work, how this incoherent organization that we call school systems or schools comes together to deliver a final product of an 18-year-old at graduation, right? And so I started to study systems work independently. To Brian's point, I use that analogy. Nobody sees you wake up when, and run those extra sprints or working your starts and trying to, trim your time down and all that stuff. I was just independently studying this stuff. And I finally got my cert for building administration, and I woke up one day and I said, I'm gonna apply to the doctoral program and the superintendent prep program, the executive leadership program. And as a Black man, remember what I said? I learned my academic confidence once I got into graduate school, right? But I wasn't confident at the time. I said, if I don't get into the doctoral program, hopefully I get into the superintendent prep program. When I applied, I have to get into both, right? And at that point in time, I had not yet even landed my first principalship. So I said, you know what? I have no burning desire to be a superintendent yet. One, because I'm young, and two, I really have not been a principal yet. So I deferred the superintendency, and then I just jumped into the doctoral work, which is research, right? But research in ways that are tied to practice. And I started to study. We looked at part of my research topic, and the process, Dr. Hobson. Part of my research topic was centered on capacity building and appraisal, right? That was my initial research, looking at subgroups and achievement, initial. And then I determined the best way to probably go into this work in a systemic way is to focus on exactly what you had mentioned earlier, which is leadership. If you really want to procure systemic change, how do you focus on developing leaders who can do the work at a high level and effective level for kids? Knowledge for service, right? And ultimately, my research focus was leadership in diversifying communities. And I started studying systems. I started studying accountability. I started studying design, and took some of those things I learned, modified it for the building level. And at Windsor High School, we saw some quick gains, right? Some quick gains, some culture stabilization, stabilizing practices. But now I knew I was ready to do it at scale. We have an outstanding program at the University of Connecticut for superintendents, coupled with my doctoral research. Now all I really needed was an opportunity. It's an opportunity. You and I were talking about this, right? It doesn't happen. So Connecticut is a small state, about 175 school districts. There's probably less than 10 or 12 places in Connecticut that have superintendents of color. I'm going to say it again. Almost 180 districts. There's probably less than 10 or 12. that have superintendents of color, right? So when the opportunity comes, you better seal the deal. But not only do you have to seal the deal, you also have to be able to deliver, because the microscope is a lot different than for some of our counterparts, right? And also, um, if you deliver, it creates new opportunities for the next generation, the next cohort of people looking to do good work for kids. So I don't walk around with that kind of burden on my shoulders, right? I hold myself to a standard that I'm going to be good at what I do because it impacts our kids, right? It impacts our kids. But that has largely been my transition into the role, and it's a very unique time to become a superintendent in the middle of a pandemic. I came in fully prepared, but I'm learning a lot in the role, and I'm actually fortunate and I'm blessed that I landed in the community that I'm in, because my staff have just been unbelievable. When I say unbelievable, unbelievable. I'm inspired every day by what they do for our kids, particularly given the context and COVID and all that stuff. I was in schools yesterday, and teachers are helping each other out. People are still coming off the holiday break right now, and it's like, some people are recovering from COVID, so they're not in the office or in the classroom. So when they get a chance, another teacher pops right in. It's just a demonstration of community and selflessness that I think obviously illustrates the value that people place in their children. So I'm blessed.
And I love it. I love it. I love it. A few things that I've been taking note on since earlier was people can look at you right now in your position and just assume, man, he must have always been having it going on, man, to be able to land a position like that. And you mentioned not having the grades, at one point in time. You mentioned academics not really being your thing until you got into higher education. That's one of the things that I love to pour into students whenever I do mentorship work. As a undergrad, you got all these core requirements, a ton of them that you could care less about. So you don't enjoy school as much. So I tell them, as you get to a higher and higher level of education, it gets a lot funner, and it
Mm-hmm.
gets a good bit easier because you're focusing on what you want to focus on, and you have a lot more flexibility of when you can take your classes, if you can do them online or in person. Like, there's just so much more enjoyment after you get to a higher level. Yes, more work comes along with it, but you don't feel as defeated when you're doing the work because something is going to be useful for you moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
um, Another thing, a lot of people see I've got 3 degrees. Started on the fourth one, making some or going through some transitions before I can continue and eventually get my doctorate.
Good for you.
And thank you. And people automatically make an assumption when I go to speak to students that it was a cakewalk for me. But I have to incorporate from 2007 to 2010, I was sitting out. Not because I wanted to. I was academically suspended. I was a flunky. I went from 3.89 GPA to a 1.76,
Oh wow.
and I got the boot. And that was before I had any degrees. But I realized during the time, I had a son, my first child. So that was like the trigger. This isn't all about me anymore. So my focus switched. I also have a bachelor's degree in psychology. One of my bachelor's is in Spanish, a foreign language. And I went from there to really let me use what I got my education in to really help the community. And even if it wasn't related to my job, I used my knowledge for help with everybody around me, friends, family, whatever it was. And then ultimately,
Knowledge
I
for
got to
service.
say again,
Knowledge for service.
yes,
Yep.
exactly. So ultimately, what I did as a profession was easily interwoven with who I was just as a person in general.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what led me to coming back and working in the social work space, but doing it my way. Not saying I'm going to get this degree and go sit and work for an agency. But no, I'm going to get this degree. I'm going to create an agency. I'm going to
Yeah.
partner with agencies. I'm going to say, yes, I love what your agency is doing, but there's this pocket of community that you can't really relate to, and you don't have the staff that has the capacity to relate to them. So let me just incorporate a little something extra using some of your resources, use some of our resources, and let's make a more profound impact. And that's what I did from before I even graduated with my master's degree, helping universities develop programs, auditing university curriculum, so on and so forth. And I was a college flunky. I got kicked out. So
Yeah, but it's Brian. It's your story is so profound, um, because it speaks about resiliency, right, and focus, right. And I think Dr. Hobson and I were talking before we got on about how oftentimes programs start and it never goes the distance, right. And so to hear your story is exactly this is why this platform and the mission of what y'all are trying to do is so powerful. Is people have to understand that everybody who ends up, standing on that podium, it wasn't all, for me. Listen, if I have a rock star of a fiance by my side who understood the work of a superintendent that I'm working 17 hours a day, or she kept pushing me to, complete my doctoral work, I don't know if I would have accomplished a lot of the things I've accomplished over the last couple of years. You know what I'm saying? It's rocky, it's bumpy. I remember a point in time where I have one of the best dissertation chairs. She got a degree from Harvard, and that woman challenged me in ways where it had me laying in my bed at night looking up at the ceiling talking to Jesus, right? She challenged my thinking. She stretched my thinking. There were times where there was literally one time where I told her, I said, I can't do this anymore. And I was at like year 4, right? Um, it's rigorous, it's challenging, but you learn so much, and that's part of the doctoral experience, right? But I think our kids, the next generation, they need to be able to hear that you don't just wake up, flip on a light, and all of a sudden, I mean, don't get me wrong, you might be able to do something on TikTok and go viral, right? That's the microwave culture, and make a
That's gonna last a while till something else comes out or your body goes down the drain. Nobody gonna look
exactly,
at you.
exactly. But a lot of the stories I hear from you, Dr. Hobson, from you, Brian, and I'm sure very similar to a lot of the panelists, that you've had on the podcast, is this story about growth anchored on grit and anchored on resiliency, right? But sometimes it's easy to fall off the path, right? So, Brian, for you, your son reoriented your focus for you, right? How do we, as people who've lived it, help our young ones reorient their focus if they don't have that guiding star, right? Because it's so easy to go left or go right and not stay on track. And I think that's the essence of a lot of these conversations. And for me personally, I'm so inspired. I know I'm not the only person doing this work. I'm one of millions, but I think it's so necessary. Certainly in
There's
2020.
definitely not 1 in a million of superintendents walking around because there's only a 1%, half of 1% of that. So you definitely, you're so humble. So you're always like, yeah, I played for the Browns for a couple of days, and then I did, like what?
You know what? You know what? Here's the thing, though. Remember, I tell you like this, though. I don't talk about it much. I
Right.
don't, and the reason why I was if you come to my office, I got a real nice office now. If you come to my
I'm
office,
sure.
you're not gonna see, you're
I'm
not gonna
sure.
see, you're not gonna see nothing about football. And the reason why is because I worked so hard to, outside of my physical size,
Mhm.
right? Outside of my physical size, I worked so hard to make sure that people took me seriously as an academic
Yes.
and as an
Yes.
educator, more
Yes.
so than you got somebody who's 6'4", 255
Yeah.
pounds.
Changing the narrative of being a job.
Exactly, So that's why I don't lead with it. I mean, people just Google the name, whatever, it pops up. But I want you to also know that I know a whole bunch of big words, right? And I want you to know that we're going to teach your kids a whole bunch of big words, and they're going to go out there and they're going to do some amazing things.
Yes, I love it. I love it. I always tell that, again, not leading by example, but being the example. And it's good that our generation, especially those that you lead, can see that he played football, he did this, because it tells them so you can be a student. I had an athlete tell me last week. I said, "Are you doing better in your classes?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I know I got to be a athlete student." I said, "No, bro, it's student athlete. You got it backwards, you know." So, but he didn't, he said it so like, and I'm like, no, you have it all mixed up. But, again, just what I love about the things that you talk about is meeting people where they're at,
Mm,
and allowing them to have their own journey. I tell the girls, when like Brian uses this story a lot before, but a lot of the girls I see, or boys I see, like, what was your life like? I want mine like yours. Like, no, you need to create your own story. You're in
mhm,
the perfect story right now where you can still change a lot of things. And today I had got some bad news that one of my students, he actually died in his sleep. And I think he's a senior this year. Um, so these times are different now, that, and just seeing the kids, and I'm dealing with my own grief, and so to be able to comfort them and figure out how can I be strong for them, but also show them that it's okay to be that emotional side, working in a predominantly Hispanic and Black culture where, Hispanic boys don't be crying, Black boys don't be crying, what you crying for? And then girls, don't show no fear, don't show anybody you hurting, you
mhm.
just keep going. And we've taught those things to our kids, and it has not helped our kids because we never really know what they're dealing with internally. And so now you're having kids at 16, 17 years old dying in their sleep of a heart attack because we internalize everything that we do. We're taught that I don't care if you cry, or if you cry you look weak, or and so we have to get away from those stigmas and stereotypes that have been placed on us. So I really appreciate you, sharing your story, because not all your young men that you see are going to go to the NFL or have your same journey, but it's good for them to see that you can be both. Those days of just being an athlete, that's over. That's been over, but it's really over now, because it's like, the chances of you making it or whatever is a lot slimmer. But that's why Brian and I created these programs and created our organization, because we knew that the only way to create change is to be the change. And
Absolutely.
so we said, well, we're going to bring the resources and the programs to you. You don't have to do nothing. You just got to let us come in and we'll create it, and we'll help leaders know what kind of conversations do you have with our students now, because they deal with a lot more than we ever dealt with. I feel like they deal with, like you talked about, social justice, the trauma, the pandemic. I mean, we didn't have to deal with a whole lot of those things. We dealt with some, but not to this extreme of these kids. So I thank you for being so open to that. And I was laughing when you were talking about when you're defending your your
Yes.
dissertation, and my family all got to come on to a Zoom, like, and see me defend. And I remember defend, and then my dad got pissed off because he felt like the lady was challenging me. I had one like you. She was like, "Why? And why?" He was like, "See, this is ridiculous." He said, "I was about to tell her, like, leave her alone already." And so he logged off. So by the time
Always daddy's little
he
girl.
got off of it, because I guess he felt like he was about to say something. And so, it was such a blessing to hear her at the end say, "You've passed with no revisions." I was like, here's the girl that has to take 1,000 sticky notes all over. I just didn't know what to do. But I remember calling my dad, and he was like, okay, so, like, I just couldn't take it. He was like, he done did 25 years or 26 years in the Army, and you talking about you can't take somebody asking me questions. And so he was like, I got off of that. She don't know why she kept asking the same thing over and over. Why and why and why? But it just shows that, certain things that we've gained through being an athlete. It's like, look, I've made it too far. So you can ask me what you want to ask me, but I'm going to give it to you because I believe in my truth. I know that this is something that's needed. And so I thank you for also being that example, and just being so open to coming and sharing your life and your experiences, because not too often do you get a superintendent to say, sure, I have time to mess around with y'all for a little bit. And so we, really appreciate you doing that. And we truly believe and know that you're going to continue to do some amazing things. And I know that you haven't even touched the surface of what what you will be doing and the type of impact that you'll have. So just thank you for just being open arms and being vulnerable. You know, we don't do that too much. Especially you see, you know, the stereotype of Nigerian men of very masculine. Like, I ain't gonna tell her all my freaking business. So, so we thank you for just being vulnerable, right? I think that they need to see, like, hey, these were my challenges. This was my tradition. This is my journey. They need to see those stories. And so I thank you for keeping it 100 with us and sharing your life with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. And one last thing I wanted to kind of highlight again was the importance of not living off the glory days. You could easily just plaster your walls in your office with NFL pictures and let that be your legacy. But you say, you know what? You might find out about that legacy someday, but I've developed a new legacy. And that comes with lifelong learning, always wanting to grow into more. Whereas, why we put together this company is to let athletes know your life isn't over after athletics. You can recreate yourself. You can become that next version of yourself, and you're an exemplification of it. And I'm gonna give you applause for that because you're an example, man. I love it. I love
So
it.
are you, and so both of you, so are you. This work is so important, and we need to continue to amplify these stories and these voices, and get an audience of our teenagers and adolescents, our 8, 9, 10 year olds, to hear these conversations. They're so sophisticated, they're so vulnerable, they're so deep, but more than anything, it's so authentic. So um, I applaud both of you. You guys are sent by you're both sent by a higher power to do this work. So thank you for this.
Thank you,
Sir.
thank you, thank you, thank you so much. So we're gonna go ahead. Oh, before we do that, if you can let people know if you have any kind of books or products, how we can support anything that you're doing. Um, I don't know if you have any books in the making or already have some books out there or whatever you're doing, but where people can find you, even if it's LinkedIn, just to make sure that there's other people that may want to get into leadership or whatever you have. Where can we find you? What do you have? What are you doing? What's next?
Yeah, no, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. So if anybody needs some kind of support, mentorship, or some collaboration, please let me know. The book is going to be the next phase of my life. As I said, I get married next in a week and a half, 2 weeks. So I'm going to pour a lot of energy into that. We're excited. I don't have any products and I don't move with products. Okay. The only thing I ask for people is something that's actually quite simple. All right. Which is to continue to do the work for other people's kids. And if we all take that kind of as a personal mission, I think the world's going to be in a better place.
I
Well,
love
that
it.
was great. You could just drop the mic on that one. So thank you again. And I guess we booked you just enough time because if I would have been a week late, you would have been like, no, I'm not able to do that with you.
Honeymooning.
So I got in there just enough time. So thank God for that. But thank you again for sharing your story. And we're gonna go ahead and close out and put you in the backstage and we will close out with you at the end.
All right.
Thank you.
Sir.
Well, we said a lot, and I thank everyone for being a part of today's show. Please make sure you do your part and share this content, share this video, share these stories, just share it because um, he's amazing. It's just not enough time in an hour to talk about somebody's whole journey, but we've learned so much. And so it shows what you're capable of doing, what happens when you continue to challenge yourself. You know, we're never too young or too old to do anything. So his life is still, like Brian said, he's built one legacy, but he has something totally different. And so to find somebody as humble as him to say he could have stopped after the NFL and just said, I'm good now. I'm just going to go into being whatever. But he wanted to change and make an impact into the masses. And I think that's just so important. And it's been great to be a part of now with him.
Yeah, very true, very true. And we just got to continue to support those of us who are doing the good work because it's so easy to say, you know what? I made my mark on the world. I had my career that I grew up and fought for. I'm just about to kick back. Let me see if I can make this money, make some money for me, and y'all go and you do you. It's so easy to do that. Dr. Hobson and myself, We could easily settle into a career based off of our academic track and not do anything extra. We don't have to be doing this right here. We don't have to be, putting together a company together, but we're doing it because it's about more than what we want. It's about the next generation. It's about making sure that our kids, nieces, nephews, cousins, those that come after us, they actually have a world that's better. They have a world of more opportunity. They have a world of more access. And instead of us going to the courthouse holding a sign, give us better access. No, let's put something together and create it. So we don't
Right.
have to ask for it. Stop
Right.
asking and start creating.
And start doing. Yeah, for sure. Well, we love you guys. We thank you for again being so supportive over this time that we've had over the year and a half. And just today, we've had a lot of people tune in. And so please just make sure you do your part and share this video. And we will see you every Thursday here on the Black Podcast. So thank you again. We love you. Be safe. And we will see you very soon.